Now, this week, the African Union and the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, got together to release their findings about the biggest economic and social trends on the continent. The development dynamics are meant to help in coming up with strategies to raise standards of living and increase opportunities for more people across Africa. So for a closer look at this regional checkup, I'm joined by Mario Pezzini, the director of the OECD Development Centre. Mario, thanks so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
First of all, so the continent's doing pretty well. Growth for this year at 3.6%, which is well above the global average. What is it doing right?
Well, you said it. There is growth, and it's not only this year. From 2000 to 2018, every year was 4.6% of growth, which is remarkable. Just to give you an idea, Latin America has been on 2.6, and this year is only 0.7. Asia, obviously, is the continent that is growing the most. In those years, it has 7.6. But I will consider that the 4.6 of Africa is remarkable. Now, why is so high the rate of growth? Because there is an internal demand. This is even more important because what will be the global growth this year? You mentioned it. It will be 2.9 and next year 3%. Trade is not growing. We are at 0.7%. If you wait for investment or for consumers to buy your product from outside, you will lose your time. So now the situation in Africa is very good. And you see also in terms of firms, there are firms, African firms, that are exploding. Production of textile, for example, MTN, is producing 8,000 jobs. You have firms that use now sorghum to produce Eagle beer. And that's an innovation that obviously produces demand additional in Africa. However, the level of productivity remains low. If you compare the productivity of Africa with the one of Asia, then you have 50% of the Asian productivity.
So how do we, as a continent, improve the productivity?
I think that there are at least three things to be done. The first is we often mention firms and success cases, but what's making an economy is the small firm. And to improve the productivity of small firm, very often informal firm, we need to address these firms where they already exist. And there are clusters of firms that in many cases have potential. Nollywood, that produces all the movie in Nigeria, is a good example. Experiences of free zones that have been done in Ethiopia. Yesterday I was with the inventor of these areas. They are extremely successful cases. And why they were successful? Because policy provided those public goods, is a big word, but I mean logistic, services for administration of firms, services to control the quality of firms. The small firms cannot do everything inside. So if the place in which they are supply them with these services, obviously they can flourish. And this is the case, but it should be done on a wider scale with appropriate industrial policies. A second point is, in Africa, you have many regions that could be better integrated. At present, in Africa, African buys from other African firms only 12% of their trade or of their inputs. So it's very low. It could be improved. And how? Things, for example, production of cars is done in South Africa, but batteries are done in Botswana. And then you can have seeds that are done in Lesotho. If you coordinate better these different production across countries that are close, you can increase the capacity of Africa to serve this internal demand.
Isn't the free trade agreement going to do just that?
The free trade agreement is like providing the water. Then you have to ensure that the horse come and drink. And to do that, you may say that the agreement is a necessary but not sufficient condition. If you don't have policy that implement the agreement, then obviously the result will be very slow. That's why now a new energy needs to be put in this action, creating this regional network. Another example is tourism in East Africa. Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda are countries that can provide different supply that, if integrated in a kind of chain, then make the region very competitive. Finally, export. Africa has to produce for Africa, and there is an internal demand, which is the big resource when the general economic environment is depressed. But on the other hand, you need to continue to export also outside Africa. If not, you will never compare your product. You will never see if they are really competitive, if you could do better. These are the three directions.
Are these all focused too much on growth that is driven by raising GDP? How does this actually translate into changing the quality of lives lived by those at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale?
Great question. Professor of mine used to say, looking at the country only through the GDP would be to go and see a doctor and the doctor asks you only about your weight as the only measure. I wouldn't like to be judged only on that measure personally. Now, you can imagine countries, how they could react. Well-being is much more than growth. And growth very often does not translate in well-being. So this opens an whole completely other chapter, which is what about social inclusion? What about social policy that need to accompany the productivity growth? However, if productivity doesn't grow, you will not have the resources to put in place also the other measure. But you are totally right. Development is not growth. Growth is maybe a condition, maybe a tool. Development is improving well-being of people.
Well, thank you very much, Mario Pezzini, for coming in and giving us a breakdown of that report. That is, though, unfortunately, all we have time for on Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again. Take care.